Joining us now is Sarah Matthews, former Trump White House deputy press secretary and spokesperson for Home of the Brave, and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. We've discussed this many times. I am not a lawyer, but when I heard what Todd Blanche said, non-consensual, when she seemed to be struggling for a word I never saw anything that was. What do you make of that in terms of the number two person at the DOJ doing an interview with a convicted criminal?
Chris, if that question is to me,
yes.
There are multiple instances in this interview in which Todd Blanche attempts to fill in the gaps for Ghislaine Maxwell. There are also moments where her own attorneys attempt to fill in those gaps and sort of direct the questioning. That's not that unusual where you have an attorney, where you have a proffer session with somebody that you're thinking about entering into a cooperation agreement with, for example. What makes this so unusual is not only that Todd Blanche is President Trump's former criminal defense lawyer, but that Ghislaine Maxwell herself has long ago been convicted and is on a last-ditch appeal to the Supreme Court, and barring that, is sort of auditioning for a pardon. That's what makes this so unusual. And in particular, she struggles with the word inappropriate at various times in the interview as well, because she says herself, her definition of inappropriate might be different than somebody else's definition of inappropriate. And where it comes to Jeffrey Epstein's behavior with women over the age of 18, she specifically draws a line and says she's not going to get into that, almost as if to say anything with anyone over 18 is outside of bounds. And the only thing she thinks could possibly be illegal here is conduct with those who are underage. That's not the way law sees it. You can sex traffic somebody who is over the age of 18. We saw that, for example, very recently in the P. Diddy trial. So Ghislaine Maxwell's own understanding of the law is at best immature, and she's not really challenged on it during the course of the interview.
Sarah, the Washington Post notes that the release of the Maxwell interview, and I'm quoting them, offered no evidence to support conspiracy theories long fanned by Trump and his allies that the federal government had covered up a vast sex trafficking ring to protect powerful public figures. And yet there are some far-right influencers who appear to be pleased with this. They called it, at least one called it a good first step. Another argued the leftist narrative is in shambles. Do you think that this will help the story that Trump has wanted to go away with his base?
Well, it's interesting that way back when, a couple months ago, Pam Bondi herself said that she had the Epstein list on her desk. And so now fast forward to today, where you have Trump out there saying this is a hoax, and they're releasing just, portions of files and these transcripts and trying to prove that there was no wrongdoing on his part. But him and his supporters were out there on the campaign trail, folks like Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, saying that they wanted to release the Epstein files. And so it's just a contradiction from everything that they had been talking about. So they either have to admit, were they lying to their voters, or are they now part of a cover-up? And I do think, though, that they have ran out the clock a bit on this issue. It does seem like they're using the Steve Bannon strategy, where they flood the zone and make it impossible for the media and Democrats to keep talking about this issue when there's so much else going on, and that they've been able to release selectively enough of the files that maybe it might quiet down the base. But at the end of the day, I hope that this issue doesn't go away, because these survivors deserve justice and deserve to have all of this information out there while protecting their identities.
Sarah, efforts to quash this ongoing story, whether you're flooding the zone or you're putting out some of the information about it, may hit a roadblock in October, because that's when the publication of a prominent Epstein victim, Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir, comes out. The publisher says it has intimate, disturbing, and heartbreaking new details about her time with both Epstein and Maxwell and their many well-known friends. But they also say no allegation of wrongdoing against Donald Trump. So what might be the political implications for Donald Trump of that, even if he is in no way mentioned as having done anything wrong?
Well, we know that Virginia Giuffre was recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell while she was working at Mar-a-Lago. And Trump said that part of the reason that him and Jeffrey Epstein had a falling out was because they were poaching people from his club. Now, we know that Jeffrey Epstein does not have a club of his own. And so it leads one to believe that Donald Trump knew exactly why these young women were being poached and what they were being used for. And so I do think that her book coming out is going to be an issue for the administration and for Donald Trump, who desperately wants this issue to go away.
Lisa, Giuffre's family has called on the DOJ to do its job, in their words, by investigating and holding accountable the many rich and powerful people who enabled Maxwell's and Epstein's crimes. I want to play just a little more of Maxwell from that interview.
If I didn't make it clear, I will reiterate it. I never, ever saw any man doing something inappropriate with a woman of any age.
I read excerpts. I did not read the entire thing, to be honest with you, Lisa. At the end of the day, did Maxwell offer the DOJ or offer the general public anything of real value?
No, I don't think so. I think she offered the Department of Justice something of value in the sense that she exculpated President Trump very neatly and cleanly in ways that the release of the documents might not be so neat and clean. You know, you have to ask yourself, why is it that we have a transcript that dangles all sorts of names that Ghislaine Maxwell dropped during the interview, and yet we don't have others of the documents because the Department of Justice is supposedly concerned with the impact on third parties? That's puzzling to me. But I will also tell you, Chris, having read the entire thing, one thing that I find particularly troubling is the names of the victims here are redacted. So we can't say for sure who she's talking about. But there's a portion where she says she sort of turned herself off to the stories of multiple victims who came forward because there was one victim who she felt lied in their civil deposition. And thereafter, all the testimonies and all of the accounts of other victims to her were just sort of fabulous, right? That she didn't want to credit them because she knew that this other victim had lied in her civil deposition. I believe that victim she's talking about is Virginia Giuffre. And so her family is right to be angry about this interview and platforming Ghislaine Maxwell here. What she has given us, to the extent that it has any value, is demonstrating how clearly she will diminish in her own mind the significance of what has happened to let herself off the hook. There are points in time in the interview where she lets you into her frame of mind and basically says, in the late 90s and early 2000s, we didn't understand men and women's relationships in the way that we do now. We viewed it through this frothy Sex and the City-like prism. That's not an excuse for any of the kinds of behavior that the victims have alleged here. And I want to be really clear about that with you and our viewers. Ghislaine Maxwell seems to think that we just understand things differently now. That's really not an adequate explanation for her alleged participation and or witnessing of what went on.
Sarah Matthews, Lisa Rubin, thank you both.